Clear now, Sheikh. Inshallah, then we can proceed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyil ameen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. وينادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي بجامعة الكويت would like to welcome you all to this special webinar entitled Some Challenges and Solutions Associated with the Private Equity Transactions, a case-based structural and Sharia analysis. So this is a very important topic for us, for the students of Islamic Finance and Economics. So we would like to welcome all participants, guests, and students to this special webinar. And today we have our guest speaker, Sheikh Taha bin Hassan, and we are privileged, we are honored to have him here today. And before we begin the session, let me introduce our Sheikh guest speaker today. Sheikh Taha is an independent scholar of Islamic ethics and law who has acted as a Sharia compliance reviewer, examiner, and consultant to investment funds, investment banks, retail banks, financial advisories, legal advisors, and other for-profit and non-profit entities since 1998. And Sheikh also was a lead contributor to the Harvard Islamic Finance Information Program's database software on Islamic finance ethics and jurisprudence. Independent study course instructor for principles of Islamic finance at Harvard Business School, and a senior tutorial advisor to Harvard University Department of Near Eastern. And also he has lots of contributions to Islamic finance and economics, and also banking sectors as a reviewer, as an examiner, and also as a instructor. So we are honored to have Sheikh Taha today here in this webinar. So without further ado, let me invite Sheikh Taha to conduct the session. فليتفضل مشكورا أستاذ.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So it's my pleasure to be with you today for a brief lecture entitled Some Challenges and Solutions Associated with Private Equity Transactions, a case-based structural and Shari'i analysis. As mentioned by Fadilat al-Dr. Muhyiddin, I have some experience in reviewing private equity transactions over the last 20 years or so. And there are some reoccurring issues and reoccurring solutions that are worth calling to mind and pulling out. Before we proceed, just a word as to how, inshallah ta'ala, we would like to proceed. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges and some of the solutions associated with Sharia compliant investors, particularly participating in private equity transactions. The approach is going to be non-exhaustive. We're not trying to mention all of the challenges or all of the solutions in this very sophisticated space, but just some remarks on some of those that stand out in my experience. Private equity, as you know, is a large area. The cases that I will mention in particular are often cross-border or multi-regional, and typically involve investment from the Gulf into Europe, or from the Gulf to the US, or from South Asia to the US. Now, we need to review what private equity is for a group of expert attendees such as yourself. But as we know, it's an alternative investment class in which capital that is not listed on a public exchange is in play. Typically, Often there are funds and there are investors. The funds and the investors invest directly into the private companies. Sometimes they engage in buyouts of public companies, thereby delisting them and bringing them into the private equity space. The capital is used for the things that capital is typically used for: technology, acquisitions, working capital, balance sheet solidification. Now, in the private equity fund space, there are limited partners and there are general partners. The limited partner, of course, brings to the table expertise in fund management skills. General partners are the investors, often institutional investors, ranging from insurance companies and pension companies to other government-affiliated entities such as sovereign wealth funds and the like, as well as other institutional investors. So the limited partners are with the general partner, which is responsible for the management and the operation of the investment, tends to be a dedicated specialty group. Okay. The approach here is, in addition to being remark-based, is going to be case-based in a manner which resembles, but of course is not identical to that which is used in the Harvard Business School. It's going to be different in the sense that we're going to use an anonymized approach because of privacy restrictions. We won't be dealing with actual names of companies or other details that are covered by confidentiality considerations, but we'll just present an anonymized and abstracted presentation of some of the cases so that we can discuss in particular the issues that are of interest to us. Those issues being primarily structural and procedural. And the analysis will be shar'i in the sense that the concern will be for permissibility, for hil, jawaz. There will also be a concern, and we will point out in some cases where there's conformance to standards. Here I'm talking about shar'i standards, so al-ma'ayir shar'iyya, such as those issued by OAFI, or in some cases those that may be issued by similar bodies, for example in Malaysia, by the SEC or the central bank, Bank Negara. Okay, so the first challenge is an obvious one, and it's the challenge that prevails throughout the conventional financial space. By conventional, we mean usurious, ribawi, namely that interest-bearing transactions, borrowing and lending, dominate the conventional financial space in general, and they are often used, of course, in a private equity space. Even though the space is called private equity, okay, it's typical for there to be the use of private debt in the sense that the financing which is advanced by a fund, or in the case of a co-investor, can often be, in part or in whole, a loan, an interest-bearing loan. Okay. Similar, but distinct from this, are the issues of interest-bearing lending, borrowing and lending, that are at play in the financing of a project or of a deal, other than the transaction, which represents the investment of the investor itself. So if there is a deal, as there typically is a deal, in which investors are expected to invest in the form of an interest-bearing loan, then this poses a problem, obviously. If there is little to no room to change the nature of the proposed investment, or other factors, similar factors apply, then this belongs to the significant class of opportunities in which a Sharia compliant investor cannot participate. All right, and this is often the case. All right, if because of the stage at which the deal is currently in the cycle, it's pre-execution, not only the pre-execution, but pre-structuring, or because of other issues that may be at play, there's the opportunity to make changes to the proposed deal. Then there are opportunities potentially to deal with alternatives, those including alternatives with which you are quite familiar, such as commodity murabaha financing, or various equity financing based on shirka, right? Whether it be the so-called musharaka mutanaqisa, the diminishing balance equity-based financing approach, or a mudaraba, or the like. Okay. A case that can come to mind is one in which a leading LP, a leading private equity firm, was asked to submit a response to a request for responses, an RFP from a prominent Southeast Asian country for the creation of a facility for management of its Sharia compliant pension scheme, and competing with the most prominent private equity firms in the world. Among the issues that were involved in making the proposal was whether or not the private equity firm could use the set of mechanisms and approaches with which it was familiar and that it typically used in a conventional space. These included private debt in leveraged buyout scenarios and the like. And after examining those in detail and looking at the possibilities of restructuring them, it became clear, obviously, that because of the prohibition of riba, that it would be impermissible to use the conventional tools, and that it was probably best to avoid typical private debt scenarios in the main, and that to just restrict the proposal to one in which only equity-based financing was advanced as a possibility. Okay. Oops. Sorry. There you go. Okay. The second challenge is that even in the case of equity investment, it's typical that equity investment, which is done in the private equity space, is equity investment in which there are there are clauses, conditions, contractual features that are usurious, that are ribawi in nature. An example of this, of course, is the existence of preference shares, also known as preferred stock, in the share agreements that tend to govern these type of investments. A case in mind would be one in which a prominent Sharia compliant fintech company was contemplating a round of financing in which it would be interacting with, and in fact was in late stage negotiations with US-based private equity firms, in this case venture capital, which is typically conceived of as being an arm of an element of private equity, a venture capital investor who wanted to use standard terms and standard documentation in order to make an investment. Such investment featuring, as is the case with typical investment firms, in this case, a Boston-based investment firm specializing in investing in technology, preferred stock, in which some classes of equity would have liquidation, dividend, and other features that, although they would be classified as equity, in fact, as a matter of financial behavior, are hybrids in that they have many of the features of fixed income securities, right? These features in the main violate the conditions, the shurut that are associated with investing via shirka, investing in a partnership per the Sharia, because they give advantage to one partner over the other, and because they're ma'oon, because what they result in is they result in riba. They result in the accrual of a benefit to one party in a bilateral transaction, in mu'awada, which is not countenanced by the Shah, right? Therefore, what needed to be done here is that the proposed documentation for investment in the fintech entity from the venture capital firm needed to be modified in collaboration with the Sharia Advisory Board, of which I was a member and was the chair at the time, so as to make changes to the preference shares and similar clauses. Case 3 of challenges. We're still talking about challenges rather than solutions. There are challenges associated with investing as an LP. This is a type of investing the LP in a fund with conventional investors. Okay, so or as we'll see, or as a minority partner in a JV, if we're talking about a real estate transaction in which there's typically are multiple vehicles, but the primary vehicle can be a junior venture between two or more. A joint venture between two or more entities who are developing a property, or even as an equity co-investor. One of the scenarios that frequently happens, as indicated by the diagram, is one in which you have a private equity fund, and the fund is making an investment in a portfolio company, or in the case of, or it could be a real estate, if it's a real estate fund in a real estate project, or what have you. And you may have an investor who invests in the fund, but also takes a position outside of the vehicle of the fund. You may also have a co-investor who's co-investing inside of the company without participating in the fund. All right. And then, of course, you can also have one-off transactions in which the private equity firm invests in a company, not through a fund, but just directly in the company, and there may be one or more co-investors. Okay. In these cases, there are a number of issues associated with investing as a Sharia compliant investor, where the other investors are conventional investors. And often the conventional investors are the primary investors or the dominant investors, in the sense that the opportunity may have been discovered, early contact with counterparties may have been pursued by the conventional entity, right? So there exists, of course, pressure to invest in a conventional manner. And where changes are made and there's a desire to make changes, there's pressure to minimize those changes so that they can be as close as possible to what the conventional transactees are used to, okay? Now, in the case of a fund, this is where there may be the least latitude, right? If the fund already exists and the fund contemplating a given deal or a set of deals operates in a manner which is not Sharia compliant, then investment by a Sharia compliant LP in the fund is often difficult to countenance. All right. There are ways to do it, but those are often one-offs and don't really exist of investment in the fund per se, but often invest in co-investing as a minority partner in a joint venture or a co-investing in a portfolio company, as we're about to discuss. If you're co-investing if the Sharia compliant investor is co-investing in the portfolio company, then there are some solutions that we will discuss, but they include obviously that the portfolio company be a permissible target, although there is the opportunity, and among the issues that frequently come up in the space are, what if you're in a situation in which the Sharia compliant investors dominate to the extent that the opportunity to convert the company exists from a company which has impermissible activities to one which has permissible activities. What are those governed by? As you will know, those are governed, there are existing Sharia that exist that are typically understood to apply to public companies, but can also apply to private companies. And there is some latitude to allow for the unraveling of existing transactions and a conversion period during which new transactions moving forward will be permissible. And there is, in most instances, a acceptance and understanding on the part of Sharia advisors that such a target with the intention of converting a given company is a target which is permissible to invest in with various shurut conditions and quyud and restrictions. Okay. So those are some of the challenges that are associated with investing in this space. Now we can talk about some general solutions, and again within the structure of within the context of cases. So one general solution is engaged involvement of Sharia advisors pre-execution, that is prior to structuring and during structuring. Okay, so that is to say, an anti-pattern, right, a reoccurring way of doing things the wrong way would be to involve various parties, legal advisors, consultants of various types, management associated with the private equity firm, investors, so on and so forth, in structuring iteratively, and then to present the structure as a fait accompli, as something which is done and dusted for review by a Sharia advisor, right? That typically does not work well. What works best is to have the Sharia advisor, either in the form of an advisory firm or have the Sharia board for the Sharia compliant investor. If it's an entity that has a Sharia board, as is often the case and often should be the case, to have them involved like legal advisors and like others in the life cycle of the deal during structuring. In that way, mistakes or issues that are associated with objections on a Sharia basis can be identified early, and we can move towards permissible structures. Now, the way this is often done, of course, is that by now these have been done for decades. There are existing structures that have worked before and people just reproduce them, right? Even in this case, it is highly advisable and considered to be a solution, a pattern that one involves Sharia advisors early, because just as knowledge of the Sharia and experience in its application to contemporary transactions is needed in order to come up with a solution, the understanding as to whether or not a given prepackaged solution or template is appropriate or permissible to a given context also requires knowledge of the Sharia. So as we're going to see in the next solution, while dealing with experienced designers and structurers is useful and can be very helpful for using things that have worked before, it's important to involve the Sharia advisors early, okay? An example of this would be investment by the sovereign wealth fund of a Southeast Asian nation in the halal food sector in North America. Even prior to execution of the transaction, prior to even to its the design of the deal, the Sharia advisory firm in the U.S. was involved by the management and by the primary individuals inside the sovereign wealth fund, and they were put in contact with and engaged in iterative development along with the Washington and New York-based legal advisors. An iterative evolution of the transaction of the deal was done with considerations of tax efficiency, of course, achievement of financial objectives, and Sharia compliance all being at the table while it was developed. And that led to a shorter time than what otherwise would have been needed, and a less procedural friction, and therefore more efficient execution. Okay. Another solution is working with experienced structure designers, right? Typically, as you know, that would be law firms, often based in London and New York, who have done this with their clients various times. So they bring templates off the table, and they apply them. And this is a solution, all right, because it helps people quickly hone in on a potential solution. But as I mentioned previously, that still needs to involve the Sharia advisors. So you still need to have the previous solution, which is early involvement of Sharia advisors. Okay, I see someone raise their hand. I think we're going to have a question and answer period. But
yes, Sheikh, we do. Yeah, either after the lecture, maybe you can answer the questions. All right.
Inshallah. So
it's up to you.
If it's all right with the attendees, inshallah, I will answer the questions at the end with their permission, in the permission of Dr. Ustad Muhyiddin. Inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you. Insofar as this is a solution, if it's done recklessly, it can also be an anti-pattern, in the sense that if this solution is brought to the table, i.e. using typically a law firm and using a solution from the law firm that comes, as it were, packaged, without involving Sharia advisors early, it can lead to subtle errors that challenge issues of Sharia so-called Sharia authenticity, and even Sharia governance later in the life of the deal, right? Because law firms are populated by very intelligent people who are very good at putting things together, and sometimes can put things together in a way that require Sharia advisors who are knowledgeable about the ways that these things can go wrong, in order to find subtle issues that weren't necessarily brought to the fore So there need to be open and frank lines of communication between all the parties involved. Okay, judicious use of legal devices. By legal devices here, I mean issues such as special purpose vehicles or special purpose entities, SPEs, SPVs, trusts, and the like. For example, a Gulf-based private equity a group wanted to invest in the London commercial real estate market in a prominent real estate deal. There was an existing conventional investor which had some investors from the Gulf who were prepared to invest with the conventional investor, which had a relationship with a developer that had identified a prominent real estate, a significant real estate property that was that it wished to purchase to develop a set of buildings there, student accommodations, and then to sell it on for a profit. Okay, so typically as that would be done, you would have, of course, JVs between one investor and the experienced developer. You'd have down payments, permitting, down payments, completion of the sale, financing from a conventional entity, development, repayment and securitization of the conventional loan, sale of the property for a profit downstream. Down the line. Okay. In this case, the desire was to involve the Sharia compliant private equity group. It made it clear, of course, that they could not follow the typical investment, but the investment they bring to the table was significant enough that there was a desire to make change. The use of special purpose entities and trusts in order to keep the Sharia compliant private equity entity at an arm's length from the undesirable and impermissible aspects of the transaction, and to more than keep it at an arm's length, to make it so that its compensation came through repayment of financing that it made, Sharia compliant financing that it made available to a group of entities that were upstream from the property, rather than they're participating directly through an impermissible, rather than they're entering into a JV where the JV entity was involved in borrowing from a conventional finance or a bank in making payments on that lending in excess of principal, i.e. riba repayments, riba. And by the transfer, typically this takes place in some solutions, as I'm sure you're aware, through the use of one or more special purpose entities where financing from the investor is made in the form of whether it be murabaha or tawarruk to a top entity that is made available. Acquisition of property may be executed by one or more of a chain of special purpose entities. Then there's transition. There's a transfer on a deferred payment, right? The ajal payment of the property to a trust that has passed the Shari analysis with regard to ownership ratios, which we'll discuss, and analysis of control ratios. The trust thereby undertaking repayment of the Sharia compliant entity or its descendant or its special purpose entities for the deferred payment sale, not rather than having the Sharia compliant investor being involved directly in what the JV does subsequently. So the JV at this point is owned by the trust and the developer, and then development and other issues may move forward with this typical life cycle. When there is profit available typically through development and selling on of the property, the monies that flow up through the trust can be used to repay for the sale of the special purpose entities, basically for a buyout of the position of the Sharia compliant investor inside the partnership upstream of the project, rather than flowing directly from the project with its Sharia challenges. So this use of legal devices I'm describing here as judicious, right? Because in order for them to pass competent Sharia analysis, they need to be makharij, right? Jaiza. They need to be permissible exits for avoiding the haram, the impermissible, rather than hayl madmuma, rather than blameworthy legal tricks, right? And a difference between a hayla, harrama, and between a makhraj, jaiz, is a matter of Sharia analysis, right? It is not immediately obvious to people who aren't experts in the Sharia, right? Among the issues that are brought to the fore are ownership ratios. In some of these transactions, in order to achieve tax efficiency, there are internal loans between entities, and the loans may be loans that even feature interest payments, but because the entities are owned by the same entity, the transactees on both sides of the loan are the same entity. So it's not the riba, right? But that has to be analyzed, and it has to be confirmed that the transactees are the same, and that the form of an interest-bearing loan between one entity to another entity, where both entities are owned by the same, is what's taking place, right? With regard to the trust in relationship to the other transactees, then you need the analysis of control to see if not only formally, but as a matter of possible collusion, whether or not the trust is controlled by a transactee that it shouldn't be controlled by, such that the sale and repayment for the on a deferred basis for the sale that takes place between the family of special purpose entities and the trust of the property, that is, that for that sale to be meaningful, right, and to be for the overall approach to be considered to be makhraj, an exit, an out, rather than a hila madmuma or muharrama, an impermissible trick or stratagem. Okay. I'm gonna leave it right there, and because I want to leave time for questions, and we'll take questions, inshallah ta'ala. Is the time good, Dr. Muhyiddin?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. And now we can open the session for question and answer. We can see here in the question and answer sections, a question from Brother Ali Kaya. Why do the Sharia standards vary between Malaysia and the Middle East? The question number one. Yes, Ustaz. Thank you. Ustaz Taha, you can proceed with the question.
Yes. So after giving salam to this Ustad Suhaib ibn Isa Marzuki, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, answering the question from Ustad Ali Kaya Anami. Yes. So the standards that I'm referring to, the Ma'ayir Shar'iyya, these are standards that are issued by a body. So the ahkam shar'iyya, the hukm shar'i that are associated with the given masail are the ahkam that exist in the sharia, right? That the fuqaha are led to. The standards are a write-up of them that may be issued by various bodies. They may be issued by a governmental body, and they may be issued by a private entity that represents the sector. The advantage of writing down and issuing the standards, be it by the Bahrain-based OAFI, or be it by the Bank Negara or the Malaysian SEC, as the case, is that they're easier to use by examiners and auditors and other parties, and they can be more easily enforced by regulators and the like. Why they would differ? Well, the reason that they may vary is that they're issued by different bodies who may have their own Sharia advisors. So OAFI has a Sharia board that advises it on the Ma'ayir Sharia. And of course, there is a Sharia board associated with Bank Negara in Malaysia and a bank and with the SEC itself. So the ikhtilaf, the diversity of opinion that exists on matters of fiqh among the fuqaha is the nature of fiqh, not only in our time, but since the time of the Sahaba, ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, also applies here, or different madhab of fiqh, or even within a madhab, different different opinions may apply, and which ones are chosen, or which one are seen to be the actual hukm, may differ when you have collective ijtihad and ijtihad jama'i, right? So that's why there might be some differences, although in the main they are they agree far more than they disagree, as I'm sure you know. Next question.
Yes. So next question, is it permissible to charge a fee for any late or partial payments? If so, is this acceptable under the Sharia?
So I'm not sure whether I raised this as an issue during the PE structure itself. So I don't understand if this is a question in general or a question about private equity payments. But as you know, in practice, in the amal, the way this is done is that many Sharia compliant lenders take an opinion which is based upon a qawl that can be found in the books of the Malikiya, Sada al-Malikiya, the Maliki fuqaha, that allow for the imposition of a charge in the case of late payment or the like, with the important proviso, shart qaid restriction, that it not be consumed by the counterpart, the financier itself, that it needs to go to charity, to sadaqah. In that way, you get what a conventional economist would consider to be the benefit of the economic benefit of having there be some penalty associated, some economic costs associated with paying late when one is able to pay, without violating, per this opinion, the impermissibility of imposing a late payment for a debt in consideration of an increase in time of repayment. So yes, a late payment that goes to a channel of sadaqah that doesn't go to the lender or to the financier itself. Wallahu a'lam.
Yeah, thank you, Chef. So next question, if anybody has questions, either you can write your questions in question and answer section, or you may raise your hand so that you can speak. We will switch on the microphone and you can speak as well. So next question, you can see here, how is Ijara financing different from conventional lending? Isn't it simply relabeling interest as profit?
I mean, relabeling interest as profit would be impermissible, because one of the well-known qawaid principles of fiqh is that consideration is given to the reality, not given to just names and forms. And there are other forms of it, of that qaida as well, but essentially the meaning is the same. So just relabeling names wouldn't suffice because there's no faqih, there's no person who would be willing to sell their deen and endanger their position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for some sort of benefit in the dunya by just saying, if you call it this, it's permissible. If you don't call it that, it's permissible. Rather, the difference, in order for it to be permissible, needs to be a difference which is substantial and which is meaningful in the Sharia. And I think this is where there's some confusion about this issue. Right? It doesn't need to be the case that the difference is a difference that's considered to be meaningful by someone who's an expert in another space. So if a financial economist says, oh, this transaction to me has the same, not only outcome, but has the same analytical characteristics from the point of view of financial economics, and therefore someone looks at that and says that means they have the same hukm shar'i, this is a confusion, right? Because the expert space is just associated with understanding whether or not something's permissible and permissible is fiqh. It's its own discipline. So you should look to that discipline to understand whether there's a difference. In the case of ijara, or whether musharaka al-mutanakhis, or whether it's muradaha, or whether it's salam al-nawazi, or other ways of being able to invest in the conventional. In ijara, as the name indicates, it has to be based upon lease. So there needs to be an asset. The asset needs to be an asset. It can't be leased. So it needs to be durable and be able to survive use such that it's not consumed and not destroyed by its use. There needs to be a lease agreement which fulfills the conditions of a lease and doesn't have any preventives associated with it. There needs to be the compensation that's there. It presumably comes in the form of rental payments or payments on a lease, ujra, right? As opposed to just being payment for the money advanced, and so on and so forth. All right. These are all the type of things which are reviewed by a Sharia board, right? So this is why it's crucial and why a sine qua non, a necessary feature of any financial entity which would market itself or present itself as being Sharia compliant, right? And its products as being compliant with Sharia halal. These need to be certified by a Sharia board, right? Because it's not an obligation to every single member of the ummah to reach the level of expertise that they're able to analyze these things themselves. But if trustworthy people are known by their peers for their knowledge of the Sharia and its application to conventional space, to the contemporary financial space, in a group, review and hold that it's permissible, then these can be relied upon. All right.
Jazakallah khair. Yes. And also thank you, Brother Ali. He has the last question. How are Sukuk, Islamic bonds, different from conventional bonds? Very urgent question.
The question is similar to the previous one. As you know, as per OAFI, there are 8 different types of, 14 different types of Sukuk. They can be classified in a different way. Sukuk in the main are essentially participatory certificates which represent a position in real or beneficial ownership of an underlying asset or pool of asset or services that beneficial or that ownership, even beneficial ownership of which entitles one to benefit from that asset or pool of assets in a way you benefit from another asset, meaning that if it's leased or if it's sold, you can benefit from the rental payments or from the cost, the thaman for transferring his ownership to someone else and the like. All right. Now, of course, the these asset-based or asset-backed participatory bonds and participatory certificates are structured in such a way so that their financial behavior is similar in many ways to conventional bonds, because that's why they were created, to be a Sharia compliant fixed income alternative in a portfolio, alternative to a conventional bond, right? But as we mentioned before, that they behave in many ways as they were designed. Similar to something which is impermissible does not mean that they are permissible, that they are impermissible themselves. The way that one would know, short of being asking oneself, is to have them reviewed and have them indicated by trustworthy, knowledgeable people of fearful of the law, known for such fear, as being permissible. And what this typically means is, just since I've been a Sharia advisor, and I sit on Sharia boards that do this sort of thing, it means evaluating for the assets or the pool of assets. If there's legal and other evidence that there's actual ownership of the assets, that there's actual transfer of ownership or beneficial ownership, that there's actual repayment, that there's actual leasing if it's lease-based, that there's actual sale if it's sale-based, right, through conducting an audit or an examination, Shari, audit or Shari examination, and so on and so forth. So that's the somewhat longer answer to the question.
Mr. Aska, yes, inshallah, you will get the certificate maybe in few days. Our secretariat will take note, inshallah. So from Brother Majid Abu Hujair, why American currency depending on paper notes instead of gold and silver like Islamic countries?
So first of all, unfortunately, most of the nation states in the world who have Muslim majority populations also issue fiat currency, which is not backed by gold and silver, regrettably. And so similar to American or European currencies, European fiat currency is also backed, to quote from the print which exists on the American currency, by the full faith in government, full faith of the government of the United States of America. As a matter of economic history, I'll leave that to an economic historian, why it is that nations, particularly post-Bretton Woods in the 1970s, in a move that is longer than that, moved to moving to fiat currencies which were completely unbacked by gold and silver. Conventional neoclassical economists will tell you that there are advantages associated with that. It gives governments and their independent central banking authorities more latitude to be able to address issues of full employment and inflation and so on and so forth, and that gold and silver are that there's nothing special about them in and of themselves, and that depending on one's theory of money, the conventional theories, prevailing conventional theories of money hold that that currency is what people decide currency is on, and once it's adopted and backed or issued by our government, that it can be whatever, so on and so forth. This is an issue, as you know, and there's disagreement among the fuqaha about fiat currency in and of itself, whether it's permissible and impermissible, and whether the use of it is based on a basic permissibility, right? Whether it's the hil is basic, or whether it's based upon the fact that it's what people use. As for the implied question as to whether or not a currency which was backed by gold and silver and other things would be superior, shad'an, my inclination is that that is the case, is that yes, it would be better if for Muslim majority nations use currency which was backed by gold and silver, and perhaps gold and silver and other things as well, because the least of it is that it would be khuruj min mahall al-khilaf. It would be a way of leaving an area of disagreement among the fuqaha, because there's no disagreement among the fuqaha with regard to the permissibility of using gold and silver as money, all right? Because that's established by nusus sharia, hadith nabawiyya, established by prophetic traditions. Mm-hmm.
Shukran, Ustaz. Hayakallah. Now we have Mr. Mashhal Alenazi. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. So I switch on the microphone for you. Please, if you have any question or any comment, please welcome.
Thank you so much, Islamic Club, and I'm interested with you. I am a new junior to clubs. I hope to be add value in clubs. I am from Saudi Arabia, and go ahead and forward. We are interested with you, and we get very information useful. Thank you so much, everyone.
Most welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, and we also we are happy and to have you here in the lectures. Alhamdulillah. And I think there is no more question from audience participants. And there is, I think, another question from Mr. Mustafa. Please link to Facebook LAN get certificate. Yeah, if you write in Arabic Nadil Iqtisad al-Islami, you will see Nadil Iqtisad al-Islami Bijamiat al-Kuwait in Facebook as well. And we do have also link we shared in the chat group, our link, Instagram link, and also WhatsApp group. So you can join us in WhatsApp group as well, or in Instagram as well. So I think there is another question from same Mr. Ali. I'm a master's student in economics. My goal and wish to study PhD in Islamic banking and finance. I'm really looking for a scholarship for the study because I'm poor, but I want to reach my goal for the sake of Kenya society. Is there any way you can help me? I think, yeah, Ustaz, you can also share maybe. You can advise Mr. Ali how to find a way to support himself in obtaining PhD.
Yes, may Allah Azza wa Jalla make it easy for you to do something, the intention behind which is in order to acquire knowledge that will help you and help others to do that which is permissible, that which Allah has allowed, and to avoid that which is impermissible. Doing so with the proper intention is completing a fard al-ayn, is completing a individual obligation, and it is associated with it's a good deed. It's amalun salih. It's a good deed in of itself, as long as one keeps one's niyyah, one's intention clear. With regard to the mechanics of how you would go about getting financing, of course, it depends on who you are, your nationality, where you're established, and what group you go to. There are programs that are present in Kuwait, where the mashallah, the Nadi, which is associated with this opportunity. May Allah reward Dr. Muhyiddin and the others who are involved in maintaining it. But also in Bahrain and elsewhere, where one can get some support, sometimes for locals, sometimes for outstanding individual students. There are other third-party scholarship institutions who look for طلاب مجتهدون, for excellent students in order to support them. And then there are people who I know of who have doctorates in this and other spaces who have who have worked or who have been provided for otherwise by Allah Azza wa Jal on their path. The well-known hadith that is associated with talib al-ilm is something that one should remind oneself of. Man salaka tariqan yaltamisu bihi ilman salaka Allah bihi tariqan ila jannah. Whoever sets out on a path in order to acquire knowledge, Allah will take him on a path that leads to Jannah. All right. And in another version of a hadith to the point that the malaika lower their wings, ajniha, over him. The ulama say this is a gesture indicating that the person is under or target of the rahmah of Allah, and this is associated with aun, with help from Allah. So if one's intention is good, and what one is doing, as is the case here, will be for the benefit of oneself and for the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, then the expectation is that with some juhud and with some sabr, with some effort, but also with some patience and perseverance, that there will be help from Allah Azza wa Jalla.
Thank you, Stas. I also like to suggest Brother Ali. You are not poor. First of all, if you have knowledge, if you have good intention, if you have tawakkul ala Allah, you are not poor. So who has knowledge and also intention to go beyond, he is not poor. So what I suggest, if you have a good research paper on the field that you are interested in doing PhD as well, you can apply in Malaysia. We do have IIBF, International Institute, Islamic Institute of Banking and Finance in International Islamic University in Malaysia. So they provide scholarship, so you can apply there. And also our ISRA in Malaysia under the Bank Negara, National Bank of Malaysia. They also every year they provide scholarships for PhD and masters as well. So you can also apply there. There is another option. You can also apply in Jamiatul Hamad bin Khalifa in Qatar and also in Bahrain. So you have to search and also you have to have a strong and very important research paper, and then you can apply. And I hope they will look into that, and you will get scholarship as well. So the best place maybe for your field in is Malaysia and also Bahrain. So inshallah, may Allah make it easy for you. So I think that's all. We don't have any more questions. Um, Thank you very much. And Nahda al-Iqtisad al-Islami bi Jamiat al-Kuwait would like to thank all the participants and all students who joined the webinar today. And would like to thank especially our guest speaker, Sheikh Taha bin Hassan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept and grant his effort and his time. And نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى يبارك سعيه وينفع به الإسلام والمسلمين. And we also thank Nahda al-Iqtisad al-Islami, especially the Director General, Dr. Ala, who is doing a great job for providing this Islamic khidmah and services freely for the Ummah. So we thank all the management board of the Nahda al-Iqtisad al-Islami. So, Ustaz Taha, if you have concluding remarks, please welcome.
No, Jazakumullah khairan ahsan al-jaza. I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla Ta'ala to aid both the presenters and coordinators and the sponsors and backers, as well as, of course, all of the attendees with his aun and his rahmah and his special inayah, and to make it easy for them to accomplish those things which are beneficial to them in this world and the next, and to the Ummah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam in this space or in other spaces. Wa jazakumullahu ahsan al-jaza.
Barakallahu feek, Ustaz, Jazakallah khairan. And we thank participants in Zoom as well who joined our YouTube channel, through YouTube channel. We thank you very much. With that, we conclude today's session here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.